Good morning and happy Friday. Kind of feels like we should be taking a break after we just had a quiz. But we're going to keep on keeping on. This will be our last topic, which is writing equations of circles. Graphing the circles can kind of help you understand what's going on, but I don't want you to feel like, graphing is going to have to be what you do, because that's going to be hard for me to kind of assess through Google Forms. But we're going to learn how to write the equations and then interpret what the equation tells us, okay? So the first thing is, this is on that, I should have pulled that up and I didn't, my apologies. But this was also on that formula sheet that we looked at for volume for the EOC. So I just went ahead and typed it in here. So here's your formula. Let's highlight it. Okay. And let's talk about what each thing stands for, okay? So each part. So H and K are both the center of the circle, okay? Like that point or that dot in the center of the circle. That's your H and your K. That might sound familiar to you from Algebra 1 last year, with Miss Brown, where y'all learned quadratics. That's like the vertex of the quadratic. So anyways, that's similar. So H and K will be your values for the center point, and then R is the radius. Now notice, in the formula, it's not just radius. You're going to take the radius and you're going to square it, okay? And then the other thing to note is very important. The formula has minus signs in it. So it kind of means that you're going to do the opposite of what it says, okay? So because there's a minus, if you have a minus in the formula, that means you actually plugged in a positive number, okay? I'll try to explain that in just a second with number 1. So anyways, you just need to remember there's always a squared on the outside of the parentheses. The X and Y will always literally just stay X and Y. And you'll have a plus between the two sets of parentheses always. And then radius squared. This squared is not going to stay there because you're actually going to like square the number. So X will stay, Y will stay. The negatives will sometimes change depending on if you plug in a negative or a positive number, and then the squares will always stay. Okay, so let me say that one more time. Let's underline in a different color. Let's use purple. So the purple ones are going to stay. So the squared here, the squared here, and the plus sign, those will always stay like that. And then, of course, the parentheses. Everything else will kind of simplify down. All right, so let's look at a problem. So this is a problem where I am telling you the equation. You have to do what I call pluck out the center and the radius, okay? So the first thing is, let's look, and we should identify that this is our H and our K, and this is our R squared. Now notice it's already been squared, okay, because it's been plugged in the formula for us. So the radius, let's start there. The radius is not 36, okay? R squared equals 36. So what does that mean we had plugged in there so that if we squared it, we got 36? Well, because that's a nice perfect square, that means the radius was 6, right? Because if we squared 6. And another way to solve that is just to take the square root. So R equals 6. Okay? So I can leave that. That's fine. So just remember, the radius is not the number you see, it's the radius squared, so you have to take the square root of it. Sometimes it'll be a perfect square, like in this instance, but not always. Okay, so then our center. Okay, so we need to be very careful here. Because there is a minus, a lot of students would want to say the center is at -2, 1. But that would be incorrect, okay? Because there's a minus in the formula, that means it matches with what was in the formula. So that means H was a positive number to begin with, okay? Because if we plugged in a +2 here, it would stay negative, okay? So basically, it's just the opposite of what you see in the formula. So when I see a -2 here, that means I'm putting a +2. So here, It's a positive, which means I had to have plugged in a negative, and it would have looked like this, y minus negative 1 squared. But it doesn't stay that way because then, you know, a double negative makes a positive. So again, if you don't really understand what I'm saying, it's okay. The shortcut is basically whatever you see in the formula, just write down the opposite. Okay, now you're not going to have to do this, but I'm going to show you, well, you know, to the best of my ability. So I'm going to put the center at 2, -1. So 1, 2, -1 is right here. And then a radius of 6. So that means I'm going to go up, down, right, left, 6 spots from the center. Oops, I don't need to make a dot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And then, I know it kind of looks like a square right now, but you just have to kind of envision, you know, it going like this. That's not terrible for me. This side needs to come out a little bit more. But you kind of get the drift. So that's your radius. So your circle. So you have a radius of 6 regardless of where you draw it. It's just easiest to see on the perfect horizontal and vertical that's a radius of 6. Okay? All right, so that's what our circle would look like. All right, let's try another one. So I'm going to start with the radius again. So our radius squared is 16. So what does that mean our radius actually equaled? 4, right? Because if we take the square root, radius would be 4. And again, you can kind of think, if I plugged it into the formula where it was r squared, if we did 4 squared, that would give us 16. Okay? And now our center, we're going to pull our h and our k. And remember, we just want to write the opposite. So I see a +3, so that means I'm going to put -3. I see a -2, which means I'm going to put a +2. Okay? So then I'll go to -3, 2, and then I'm going to go up 4, down 4, and then I can draw my circle. Okay? All right, and then number 3 is just one more example. We'll talk about why I don't have a graph for this one in just a second. So let's start with the radius. So our radius squared is 5. All right. This one is not a very quote-unquote pretty one because 5, if I have r squared equals 5, that's not a perfect square, right? So that means that this is going to have to be a radical. So if you take the square root of it, r equals the square root of 5. And if you think about it, if we were to plug that in the formula where you square it, don't you remember that the squared and the square root cancel each other out? So we would be left with 5. Okay, so that is why we don't have a graph for this one, because we are not going to want to graph the square root of 5 because it's not like a, you know, nice perfect square. All right, now what about the center? We only have one set of parentheses here, so my h is going to be the opposite, which is +2, and then what is my k going to be? Well, there's literally no number, so it's the number 0. Okay, so we could write this if we wanted to, but like y minus 0 is just y, right? So it looks better this way as opposed to the original way. Okay? All right, so that is looking at an equation and plucking out the center and the radius. Now we're going to work the opposite way, okay? So now I'm giving you the parts of the circle, and I want you to plug it into the equation, okay? So again, here's the equation up here. Yeah, now we can see it all in one screen. Okay, so the center is 0, 0. So that means I'm going to go x stays the same, minus, this is my h, and this is my k, and this is my r. All right, so I'm going to go x minus 0, and then a squared, plus y minus 0 squared equals 9 squared. Now, I just need to clean this up. And what did we just get through saying in example 3? Do we want to leave it with minus 0? And the answer is no, because x minus 0 is just x, right? So the best way this is going to look is like this. All right, we don't need the parentheses, and we still need the squared, of course. And then 9 squared, we actually want to do 9 squared. So what is 9 squared? Well, 9 squared is 9 times 9, which is 81. So there's our final answer. Okay, so we're just plugging into the equation. All right, let's try another one. So we're going to do h and k, and this is our r. All right, so we're going to go x minus -5 squared plus y minus 1. Remember, the minus is in the formula, and then I'm just plugging in what I see. Equals 4 squared. And now I'm going to clean this up. And so what I mean by that is x minus a -5 is not going to stay that way. That's going to be x plus 5. Some of y'all probably could have gone there immediately, because remember how we talked at the beginning that it's just the opposite of what you see. So because I see -5, 1, that means I'm going to put a positive 5, and then I'm going to put a -1, and then what, because this doesn't need to be cleaned up any. This one did, this one does not. Okay. And then what is 4 squared? So 4 squared is 16. Okay. All right, and then the last one, this is our h, this is our k, and this is our r. So we're going to go x minus 4 squared, because the formula has a minus in it immediately, and then -3 squared equals 7 squared. So let's clean it up. So x minus 4 doesn't need to be cleaned up. That looks good. And then y minus -3 is going to turn to y plus 3. And then 7 squared is 49. All right, and then you could kind of go back to what we talked about at the beginning. If you pluck it out, would you get back to what we had originally? Do the opposite of this number, square root of that number, and it would give us back to what we had. Okay, so we have this way, the one way, which is I'm giving you the equation, you pluck out the numbers. And then this set of directions is I give you the parts, you have to plug into the formula. You can kind of decide if you like one better than the other. I don't think they're too difficult, but sometimes it can get tricky about, do I square it or do I square root it? So just make sure that you kind of pay attention to that. But it's always kind of the opposite with h and k. That one's not. That kind of stays the same each time. All right, that's all we're going to do for today, and then you're going to try, we'll skip that part of the notes. I want you to try these 5, okay, and then I will have a form for you to submit it so I can kind of make sure that you're on the right track, and if not, no big deal, we'll pick up with it on Monday, and we'll make it a little bit more complicated on Monday. So, all right, y'all have a great weekend.